"You're not going to need that place," my son-in-law said, standing in my kitchen like he owned it. "We're taking the cabin for the summer. You can stay with us. We'll set up the guest room." I didn't say a word. I just smiled and said, "Check the lockbox in the den." What he found there made him go completely silent. But that was only the beginning. I signed the closing papers on a Thursday afternoon in late April. 41 years teaching high school history in Boise had left me with a pension, a modest savings account, and the kind of patience that only comes from spending 4 decades explaining the causes of the Civil War to 16-year-olds who'd rather be anywhere else. When the title company handed me the keys, I held them a moment before putting them in my pocket. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a wraparound porch facing the Sawtooth Mountains, Stanley, Idaho, 4 hours from Boise and the closest thing to peace I'd ever owned. The cabin had been listed for 8 months. Previous owners had moved to assisted living in Twin Falls. The place needed work, new insulation, a repainted deck, some rot along the north-facing eaves, but the bones were solid. Asking price was $187,000. I paid $174,500 after negotiations. Cash from the retirement account I'd spent 30 years building one careful contribution at a time. My late wife Joan would have loved it. She'd always talked about somewhere quiet after I retired. Somewhere with a porch and coffee in the mornings and no school bells. She passed the year before I retired. Pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I didn't buy the cabin as a replacement for anything. I bought it because I was 64 years old and the house we'd shared for 31 years in Boise felt like a museum, and I needed to be somewhere that didn't hold the shape of her absence in every room. I called my daughter from the title company parking lot. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad, what's up? I closed on the cabin today. Up in Stanley. I wanted to tell you." Silence, not the warm kind. "The cabin," she said. "You actually went through with it." "I did. You should come see it sometime." The porch looked straight at the mountains. "How much did you spend?" There it was. Not congratulations. Not a single question about the view or the drive up or whether I was happy. Just the number. Same voice she'd used at 13 when I wouldn't buy her the expensive sneakers. "Calculating." "Enough," I said. "It's a good investment and a better retirement plan." "Dad, that money could have." "I'll let you go. I know you're busy." I drove back to Boise alone, the new keys on the passenger seat next to my road atlas. I'd planned the first trip up for the following weekend. Air out the place, check the plumbing, maybe sit on that porch with a thermos of coffee and let the quiet do its work. I had no idea my son-in-law had other plans entirely. He showed up on a Saturday. I was in the backyard turning over the garden bed when I heard the side gate. Heavy footsteps. The stride of a man who doesn't feel the need to knock. He's 39. My daughter married him 6 years ago. He sells commercial real estate in Meridian, and he's good at it. I'll give him that. He drives a loaded F-250 and keeps his shirts pressed, and he has the habit of walking into rooms like he's already assessed the square footage. I'd never disliked him exactly, but I'd never quite trusted the way he looked at things and calculated their value. "Hey, Owen." He used my first name. Had since the wedding. I'd never asked him to. I leaned on the garden fork. "Morning." He glanced at the garden, at the house, at the fence line. "Inventory. So my wife tells me you picked up some property. A cabin up in Stanley, yes. Nice area." He crossed his arms. "Here's the thing, though. We've been talking. The kids are out of school in June, and we thought maybe we'd take the whole summer up there. Family time, you know. Fresh air. Good for the boys." I looked at him. "You want to use my cabin for the summer?" "Borrow it." "Obviously." He smiled. The kind of smile that assumes the conversation is already settled. You'd have full access to visit whenever. We'd be out of your hair by August. And honestly, Owen, you shouldn't be driving that mountain road alone at your age. It's not the easiest stretch, that last part. There it was. "I'm 64, I said. "I drove that road last weekend." He shrugged. "Just saying. We'd actually get more use out of it. And it's sitting empty, right? Seems like a waste. I took a long breath, set the garden fork against the fence. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded, already done with the conversation. Good man. We'd planned to head up June 15th. That gives you a few weeks. He pulled out his phone. I'd been dismissed and walked back through the gate. I stood there in the garden a moment. Then I went inside, washed my hands, and sat down at the kitchen table. 41 years in a classroom. I dealt with every variety of entitled teenager, every species of parent who thought rules applied to everyone but them. I knew the difference between a request and an announcement. What he just delivered was an announcement, June 15th. He'd already picked the date. I looked at the calendar on the refrigerator. It was May 3rd. I had 6 weeks. I'd spent 4 decades teaching people how to think through evidence, how to read a primary source, how to trace cause and effect without letting assumptions fill in the gaps. People who dismiss teachers as soft have never met one who's been in the classroom long enough to develop a strategic mind. I picked up the phone and called a number I'd saved 3 months earlier when I'd first started the cabin search. Howard Eklund, attorney. Estate planning, property law, residential real estate. A former student of mine, as it happened, one of the good ones, now in his late 30s, practicing in downtown Boise. Mr. Alcott, he said, it's been a while. It has. I need to come in, Howard. I want to talk about property protection, and I want to update my will. This week, if you can manage it. I can do Wednesday at 10. I'll be there. I spent Tuesday pulling documents. The cabin title, the purchase agreement, the homeowner's insurance policy, the deed recorded with Custer County. I put them in a manila folder and left the folder on my desk. Then I opened my laptop and spent 2 hours reading Idaho property law. I wasn't looking for loopholes. I was looking for the solid ground, the clear language, the places where ownership meant exactly what it said. Howard's office was on the 8th floor of a building near the Boise Center. Same quiet confidence he'd had at 17, just wearing a better suit. He read through the cabin documents while I sat across from him. You want to put this in a trust, he said. It wasn't a question. A revocable living trust, yes, with me as the sole trustee. He made notes. Assets in trust are still yours, completely under your control, but they pass outside of probate and they're clearly structured as managed assets, not casual property. He looked up. If someone wanted to argue you were casually managing things, a trust is the opposite of that. That's the point. I'll draft it this week. Anything else? My will? It currently leaves everything to my daughter. He set down his pen. You want to change it? Not entirely, but I want specific language. I want it clear that any property, the cabin, the Boise house, the retirement accounts, transfers at my discretion, and that a pattern of disregard for my autonomy constitutes grounds for revision. He was quiet a moment. You're thinking ahead. I always have. He drafted the trust documents and the will revision. I returned Friday to sign. 2 paralegals as witnesses. I signed 3 copies of each, steady as I'd signed report cards and recommendation letters and the closing papers on the cabin. No hesitation. I took 1 copy of the will home and placed it in the lockbox in the den. Steel, combination lock, a box I'd used for Joan's medical directives and the life insurance policies and our passports. I put the will on top of everything else, right where anyone opening the box would see it first. Then I drove up to Stanley. The porch was everything I'd imagined. Coffee at 6 in the morning, the mountains turning pale gold, the Salmon River audible if the wind was right. I spent Friday night and all of Saturday just existing in the quiet. Checked the plumbing. Fine. The roof. Solid. The north eave rot was worse than I'd thought, so I called the contractor in Chalice and made an appointment for the following week. I was managing the property. Documented, scheduled, attended to. On Sunday morning, I drove back to Boise. I called Howard that evening. One more thing. I want a written record of the conversation I had with my son-in-law. What he said, what I understood it to mean. Write it out. Date, time, exact language as best you recall. Email it to me. I'll add it to your file. I typed it out that night. 3 paragraphs. His words as close to verbatim as memory allowed. His announcement about June 15th. The comment about my age and the mountain road. I sent it to Howard at 9:15 in the evening and received a read confirmation at 9:15 in the evening and received a read confirmation at 9:17. Documentation. Cause and effect. Evidence before it's needed. June 15th came on a Tuesday. I was sitting on my back porch in Boise drinking coffee when the F-250 pulled up. My daughter was in the passenger seat. Their 2 boys, 8 and 11, were in the back with earbuds in. He stepped out first. She followed, looking at her phone. He walked up to the porch. Ready to hand over the keys? He said it like it was a joke. Mostly. I'm not handing over any keys, I said. The smile flickered. Owen, we talked about this. You talked? I said I'd think about it. I thought about it. My daughter looked up from her phone. Dad, the boys are excited. We've been planning this for weeks. I understand, but the cabin isn't available. I have a contractor up there this week finishing work on the eaves, and I'm driving up myself next Friday. I'm spending July there. He crossed his arms. We're already packed. Then I hope you have a backup plan. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then his voice dropped into a register I recognized, not quite shouting, not quite controlled. You're being unreasonable. We're family. You're not even up there most of the time. The place is sitting empty. It isn't sitting empty. I was there last weekend. I'll be there this weekend. I have contractor appointments. I have a recorded deed and a homeowner's policy and a trust document that places this property under my management. It is not available. A trust. He said it like a profanity. You put a cabin in a trust. I'm a retired teacher, not a careless old man. There's a difference. My daughter stepped forward. Dad, please. The kids are welcome to visit when I'm there. We could have a good weekend together, all of us. I'd like that. That's not what we planned. I know. He stood there another moment, reading me, looking for the angle where I'd yield. You'll regret this, he said. Perhaps. But it'll be my regret. They left. The F-250 backed out of the driveway and turned south. I sat on the porch a long time afterward, finishing my coffee. 2 days later, a letter arrived from a law firm in Nampa. Portman and Associates. I recognized the format. I'd seen enough formal correspondence to know what I was looking at before I finished the first paragraph. My son-in-law and daughter were filing a petition in Ada County, citing concerns about my capacity to manage financial affairs. The cabin purchase, they argued, was impulsive. The trust was evidence of confusion and paranoia. They were requesting a court-ordered evaluation. I read it twice, the way I used to read student essays, looking for the argument, the evidence, the gap between what was claimed and what was proven. Then I called Howard. They filed faster than I expected, he said. He doesn't like to wait. What's our position? Strong. The trust documents predate this filing by 6 weeks. The property records show active management. The contractor invoices, the visits, the insurance. Your will revision is on record. And I want to get 2 independent cognitive evaluations scheduled before any court-appointed assessment. Establish your baseline on the record under your own terms. Schedule them. The first evaluation was with Dr. Turd, Renata Chisholm, a neuropsychologist in Boise who'd been recommended by my own physician. 2 hours of testing. Memory sequences, verbal reasoning, processing speed, pattern recognition, executive function. At one point, she gave me 3 words, window, compass, harvest, and asked me to remember them while we talked about my career history for 20 minutes. What were the 3 words? She asked eventually. Window, compass, harvest. She made a small note. Not surprised, satisfied. The second evaluation was with Dr. Emmett Qualls, a geriatric specialist at St. Alphonsus. He was interested in my career. 41 years teaching, I told him. He asked what I'd done to stay sharp. Crosswords. Primary source reading. I still audit a history seminar at Boise State once a year. Do you manage your own finances? I have for 40 years. I have a financial advisor I consult quarterly, but I review every statement myself. He nodded, made notes, smiled faintly at something. Both doctors submitted written reports within 2 weeks. No evidence of cognitive impairment. Decision-making consistent with sound judgment and long-term planning. Patient demonstrates above-average executive function for age group. Howard presented both reports to the court along with the trust documents, the property records, the contractor invoices, the email I'd sent him in May documenting my son-in-law's announcement, character statements from 2 former colleagues at the high school, a letter from my financial advisor attesting to 30 years of careful, consistent account management. The petition went to a family court judge in Ada County. The hearing lasted less than an hour. I sat at the plaintiff's table in the same gray jacket I'd worn to parent-teacher conferences for a decade. Howard beside me, prepared, calm. My son-in-law and daughter sat across the room. Their attorney was younger than Howard, and he spoke about impulsive property purchases and uncharacteristic behavior patterns and family concern for an elderly man living alone. Judge Sylvia Tran, mid-50s, efficient, the kind of judge who reads the briefing. Let him speak without interruption. Then she looked down at the folder in front of her. Counsel, your clients filed this petition on June 17th. The property trust you're citing as evidence of paranoia was executed on May 8th, 5 weeks prior. The will revision on May 9th. The independent medical evaluations were self-initiated and completed before any court involvement. She looked up. Your client purchased a cabin, updated his estate documents, and himself evaluated by 2 specialists. How does any of that suggest incapacity? Your Honor, the pattern of behavior looks like careful planning to me. Petition denied. 1 sentence. My son-in-law's face went through several things in quick succession. His attorney gathered papers. My daughter sat very still. Howard shook my hand on the courthouse steps. Clean sweep. Thank you, Howard. Don't thank me. You handed me a complete file. All I did was show up. I drove home, made lunch, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. Winning hadn't felt the way I'd imagined. There was no particular satisfaction, just the low hum of something finally settled. The way a long school year feels at the end of June. Done. Correct. Finished. The calls started that evening. My daughter, 5 times. My son-in-law, twice. Voicemails I didn't open, I listened to hers. The first was angry. Clipped sentences. You embarrassed us in court. The second was different. Quieter. Dad, please. Can we just talk? Please. Can we just talk, please? I called her back the next morning. She came alone. No F-250 in the driveway. She sat on my couch. The same couch she'd sat on at 9 years old watching Saturday morning cartoons. At 16, doing homework. At 22, the day before her wedding when she was nervous and we talked until midnight. All those versions of her sitting in the same spot. I didn't want it to go this far, she said. Tell me what you did want. She looked at her hands. He was so sure you'd just go along, and then when you didn't, she stopped. I let him handle it. I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. I'm sorry, Dad. I believed her. That was the complicated part. I believed she was sorry, and I also knew that sorry didn't travel backward. It didn't undo the petition, the attorney's letter, the 2 days I'd spent preparing a legal defense against my own daughter. I'm going up to the cabin Friday, I said. You can bring the boys the following weekend if you want. Not him, you and the boys. She looked up. It's a good porch, I said. Joan would have liked it. I think the boys will too. She nodded. Something in her face gave way. We talked for another hour. Not about the petition or the property or the filing. About her boys, my grandsons who I'd seen at Thanksgiving and Christmas and not much else. About the summers she'd spent driving me to Joan's treatments, both of us quiet in the car because there was nothing useful to say. about the kind of family we'd been before everything got complicated. She left at noon. I walked her to her car. Friday week, she said, I'll bring the boys. She drove away. I stood in the driveway a moment. Then I went inside and booked a cabin reservation for that weekend, just me, and packed a bag. The drive up to Stanley takes 4 hours from Boise, through Mountain Home and Fairfield, and into the high country past Ketchum. The road does have some stretches that demand attention. Sharp curves above the valley, switchbacks where you have to read the road. I'd driven it 4 times now. Got better each trip. I parked in the gravel lot beside the cabin and sat for a moment before getting out. The mountains were still holding their snow at the peaks. The Salmon River was running fast from the spring melt. A pair of ospreys were working the far bank. I unlocked the front door, set my bag inside, and put the kettle on. The lockbox in the den was where I'd left it. I opened it, looked at the will sitting on top of everything else, took it out, sat down at the small writing desk I'd put in the corner of that room and read through it once, the way I used to read lesson plans the night before class, looking for anything that needed adjusting. Everything was in order. I put it back, closed the box, went out to the porch with my coffee. There was something I'd told my students every year, usually in September when we were covering the Constitutional Convention, a lesson about how the men in Philadelphia had understood something that younger people often miss. The most durable power isn't the kind you assert loudly. It's the kind you build quietly, over time, through documentation and patience and a clear understanding of what you're actually protecting. They usually looked at me like I was telling them to eat their vegetables, but sometimes, years later, one of them would come back and say they'd remembered it. I thought about that on the porch, watching the light change on the mountain faces. I'd spent 41 years trying to give young people the tools to navigate a complicated world. It turned out the tools were good for other things too, for protecting what you'd earned, for knowing your rights, for understanding that love and exploitation could exist in the same family at the same time, and that recognizing the second didn't mean denying the first. The following Saturday, my daughter arrived at 11 with my 2 grandsons and a cooler full of food. The boys ran straight for the river trail without being told. She stood on the porch and looked at the mountains. "Okay," she said quietly. "I understand now. We made dinner together that evening, the 4 of us around the small table. The boys wanted to know if there were bears. I told them yes, and they were thrilled. My son-in-law didn't come. He sent a text the following week. Short, factual. I understand the petition was dismissed. I owe you an apology. I'd like to make it in person when you're ready." I read it twice, then set the phone down. When I'm ready. Not today. Maybe not this month. But the door wasn't closed. Some things take time to rebuild, and some things stay altered permanently. And at 64 years old, I'd learned enough to know the difference isn't always apparent at the beginning. You have to wait and see what holds and what doesn't. I'm spending July at the cabin. The contractor finished the eaves. The deck is repainted. The insulation is new, and the place holds warmth now in a way it didn't when I first walked through. I found a good hiking trail that goes up above the tree line, about 2 miles of moderate climb, and on a clear day you can see 3 different mountain ranges. I go up Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The lockbox in the den holds what it always held. The title, the trust documents, the will, Joan's medical directives, our passports, all of it where I can see it. All of it in order, and the keys to the cabin are on a hook by the door. My hook, my door, my keys. It turns out that at 64, after 41 years of showing up and doing the work and building something careful and quiet, I do need this place after all. I need it more than I knew when I signed the papers. The mountains don't care how old you are. The road doesn't ask your age. The porch doesn't require anything from you except that you show up and sit down and let the morning do what mornings do. I can manage that. I always could. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in the academic sense. I spent 41 years explaining that to teenagers who mostly wanted the bell to ring. I mean in the quieter, slower sense. The way choices accumulate, The way what you build and how carefully you build it determines what survives when someone comes along and tries to take it apart. My son-in-law walked into my backyard that Saturday morning, assuming the conversation was already finished. He'd made the decision. He'd announced the date. All that remained in his mind was for me to hand over the keys and get out of the way. And I understand why he thought that. I'm 64. I live alone. I teach high school history, which most people consider a soft profession. He sells commercial real estate. He's used to closing things. What he didn't account for was 30 years of watching what happens when people don't read the fine print. That's the thing about a career in the classroom that nobody talks about. You spend 4 decades studying how power actually works. Not the dramatic version, not the version with speeches and monuments, but the slow version. How institutions hold, how documents matter, how the person who shows up prepared consistently over time is almost never the person who loses. I didn't fight back against my son-in-law with anger. I fought back with a trust document executed 5 weeks before he ever knocked on my gate. With 2 independent medical evaluations I scheduled on my own terms. With an email I sent to Howard at 9:15 on a Tuesday night that became evidence in a court filing 2 months later. Cause and effect. Not luck, not cleverness. Just the habit of treating your own life seriously enough to protect it. The hard part, the part I'm still sitting with, is my daughter. Because she isn't a villain in the story, not really. She's someone who made a series of small choices, each one feeling manageable in the moment, that added up to something she didn't intend. She let him speak for her. She let his confidence fill the space where her own judgment should have been. And then one morning she was sitting in a courtroom while a judge explained that her father had documented everything and the petition she'd signed her name to had no legal foundation, and the only thing left to do was go home. That's the part that stays with me. Not the ruling, the look on her face. I think about what I'd tell a student who came to me with a version of this story. A kid who'd done something she couldn't undo, not because she was bad, but because she hadn't been paying attention to the direction she was drifting. I'd tell her what I always told them. Character isn't what you do when you're being watched. It's what you do when the person asking you to cross a line is someone you love, and saying no is going to cost you something real. She came to the cabin the weekend after the hearing. She stood on the porch and looked at the mountains and said, quietly, "I understand now." I believed her. We don't always get to choose the lessons that find us, but we do get to choose what we do with them afterward. Owen Alcott, retired teacher, 64 years old, still learning, still, apparently, capable of sitting on a porch in the Sawtooth Mountains and watching the light change and deciding it was all worth it. It was.